The courthouse steps smelled like rain and old stone, the kind of smell Marcus Reed associated with endings. He stood at the base of them, jacket folded over his arm, phone buzzing again in his pocket. The morning sky hung low and gray, pressing down on the city as people streamed past him with their heads lowered, collars turned up, eyes trained on the doors behind him rather than the man standing alone. "Sir, you can't loiter here," a voice said. Marcus turned. The officer was already close, hand resting on his belt, eyes flicking over Marcus's face, his clothes, his stillness. Marcus offered a polite nod. "I'm waiting for my attorney," he said. "We just finished inside." The officer's mouth tightened. "Step away from the stairs." "I'm not blocking anyone," Marcus said. He kept his voice level, careful, the way his father had taught him years ago. Careful never meant safe, but it was habit. "Step away," the officer repeated, louder now. People slowed. A woman clutched her bag. Someone lifted a phone. Marcus exhaled. "Okay. I'm moving." He took one step back. The officer took two forward. "What's your name?" the officer asked. "Marcus Reed." "ID." Marcus hesitated for half a second, then reached into his pocket. The officer's hand shot out, slamming Marcus against the cold stone railing. Pain burst through his shoulder. "Don't reach," the officer snapped. "I told you what I was doing," Marcus said, breath knocked thin. "My wallet." The baton came out like punctuation. A sharp crack against his ribs. Air fled his lungs. Someone gasped. "Stop resisting," the officer shouted, even as Marcus slid to one knee, palms open, empty. "I'm not resisting," Marcus said. The words came out broken. The second strike caught his back. The third drove him flat onto the whetstone. Marcus tasted blood and rain. Boots surrounded him. Hands yanked his arms behind him. "This is unnecessary," Marcus heard himself say, the thought distant, floating. "I didn't do anything." "You people never do," the officer muttered. Sirens wailed somewhere far away, or maybe inside Marcus's head. A voice cut through the crowd. "That's enough." The officer paused. For a moment everything held still. The rain. Phones. Marcus on the ground. Then the officer leaned down, close enough that Marcus could smell coffee on his breath. "You should have known your place," he said quietly. Marcus closed his eyes. In his pocket, his phone kept buzzing, unanswered, as the courthouse doors opened again behind them. Someone in the crowd started to argue, a man's voice rising, but it dissolved into the rain as another officer arrived and put a hand on the first man's shoulder. "Handle it," she said, eyes already moving away, already done. Marcus was hauled upright. His vision blurred, then sharpened. He saw the courthouse seal above the doors, carved and unmoving, and thought of how many promises lived inside those walls. Justice, fairness, due process, words he believed in even now, even here. "On your feet," the officer said. "I am," Marcus answered. His knees shook. He focused on breathing, on staying present. He thought of the oath he had rehearsed in his head, the one he would speak soon, the weight of it settling in his chest. Not yet, he told himself. Not here. A reporter pushed forward, microphone raised. "Officer, can you tell us why?" "Back up," the officer barked. "This man assaulted an officer." "That's not what happened," Marcus said. The officer's eyes flicked to him, cold and flat. "Say another word and I'll add obstruction." Marcus fell silent. Silence had rules. Silence had kept him alive before. They cuffed him hard enough to bruise. The metal bit into his wrists. Rain slid down his face, mixing with sweat and blood, blurring the line between what hurt and what humiliated. As they walked him toward the patrol car, Marcus looked back at the courthouse doors. They were closing now, slow and heavy, shutting out the noise, the mess, the man bleeding on the steps. His phone finally stopped buzzing. For the first time that morning, Marcus felt fear, not for what was happening, but for what would happen next if no one told the truth. The holding room smelled like disinfectant and old coffee, The kind of smell meant to suggest order while masking something sour underneath. Marcus Reed sat on a narrow bench, wrists cuffed in front of him now, shoulders screaming each time he shifted. A dull ache spread across his ribs, deepening with every breath. He focused on the rhythm of it, inhale, exhale, because focusing on anything else meant replaying the sound of the baton against bone. A metal door clanged shut down the hall. "Sit tight," an officer said without looking at him. Marcus almost laughed. He was sitting. He had been sitting for what felt like hours, though the clock on the wall insisted it had only been 37 minutes since they brought him in. Time stretched strangely when dignity was stripped away. Every second felt interrogative. Across the room, 2 officers leaned over a desk, voices low but not low enough. "He lunged," one said. "Always do," the other replied. "Put that in the report." Marcus closed his eyes. The language was familiar. He'd read it hundreds of times from the other side. Police narratives that moved with the same choreography, the same verbs repeated until they hardened into fact. Lunged. Resisted. Aggressive posture. Officer feared for safety. The door opened again. A different officer stepped in, older, tired-looking, badge dulled by years of wear. She glanced at Marcus, then at the clipboard in her hand. "Marcus Reed," she said. "Not a question." "That's me," Marcus replied. She hesitated, just long enough to register him as human. "You want to make a statement?" "Yes," Marcus said immediately. "I want my attorney present." Her mouth flattened. "That'll slow things down." "I'm aware," Marcus said. "I still want my attorney." She sighed, scribbled something, and walked out without another word. Silence returned, thick and deliberate. Marcus shifted again, pain flaring. He thought about the crowd on the steps, about the phones raised, the sharp intake of breath when he hit the ground. Evidence existed. Witnesses existed. That should matter. Should. The door opened once more. A young man in a wrinkled suit stepped inside, eyes already apologetic. "Mr. Reed." "Yes. I'm Daniel Price. Public defender." Marcus studied him. Early 30s, maybe, tie loosened, the look of someone juggling too many crises at once. "I didn't ask for a public defender." Daniel winced. "I know. Your attorney hasn't arrived yet. They said traffic." Marcus nodded. "I won't speak until she's here." "That's wise," Daniel said quickly, then lowered his voice. "But I should tell you, they're writing the report now." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Of course they are." Daniel pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "The officer claims you refused a lawful order and reached into your pocket aggressively." "That's a lie." "I believe you," Daniel said too fast. "But the report is what it is. And once it's filed, it becomes sticky." Marcus looked at the cuffs biting into his wrists. "Were there witnesses?" "Plenty," Daniel said. "That helps. But witnesses get selective. People forget details when uniforms are involved." Marcus swallowed. "What are they charging me with?" "Disorderly conduct. Resisting arrest. Potentially assault on an officer, depending on how far they push it." A sharp, bitter laugh escaped Marcus before he could stop it. "Assault. I never touched him." Daniel leaned back, rubbing his temples. "I need you to understand something," he said carefully. "Right now, the narrative is forming without you. If you speak out of turn, if you say something they can twist." "I know how this works," Marcus said, more sharply than he intended. He softened his tone. "I'm sorry. I do know." Daniel studied him. "You sound like someone who's been here before." "Not like this," Marcus said. "But close enough." The door cracked open. The officer from the desk stuck his head in. "We're moving him to processing." Daniel stood. "I'll be outside," he told Marcus. "Don't answer questions without counsel." Marcus nodded as the officers lifted him to his feet. His legs wobbled. One of them tightened his grip, fingers digging into bruised flesh. "Careful," Marcus said through clenched teeth. "Should have thought of that earlier," the officer replied. Processing was fluorescent and cold. Fingerprints, photographs. A nurse glanced at his injuries and wrote something down without meeting his eyes. You need medical attention, Marcus said. You'll be seen later, she replied. Later had a way of meaning never. When they finished, Marcus was returned to the bench. His attorney still hadn't arrived. His phone sat on a counter across the room, dark and unreachable. He imagined the missed calls stacking up. Colleagues, friends, one call he knew would come and hadn't yet. A television mounted high in the corner flickered to life. The sound was low, but Marcus caught the headline scrolling beneath the anchor's face. Man arrested after altercation with police outside courthouse. The anchor's voice sharpened. According to police, the suspect became aggressive when approached by officers and resisted arrest. No serious injuries were reported. Marcus stared at the screen. No serious injuries. His ribs screamed in protest, as if offended by the understatement. Daniel returned face tight. They're already running with it, he said quietly. Marcus looked at him. What happens now? Daniel hesitated. Now we wait. For your attorney. For arraignment. For the story to harden. And if it hardens wrong. Daniel didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was honest. Then it takes a lot to crack it. The older officer passed by the doorway, clipboard tucked under her arm. She glanced in, eyes lingering on Marcus for a second longer than necessary. Something like discomfort flickered across her face before she looked away. Marcus leaned back against the wall, exhaustion pressing down on him. He thought about the steps again, about the sound of rain on stone, about the words whispered in his ear. He thought about how easily truth could be bent when power decided it was inconvenient. Outside this room, reports were being signed. Headlines were being written. Opinions were being formed. Marcus closed his eyes and made himself a promise he'd learned to keep long ago. Whatever they write, I will survive long enough to answer it. And somewhere beyond the locked doors and polished narratives, the truth waited, quiet, bruised, and stubbornly alive. The first thing Marcus Reed noticed when they released him was the sound. Not the clatter of the doors or the murmur of officers behind him, but the steady, relentless buzz of his phone once it was returned to his hand. Missed calls. Text messages stacked like unanswered questions. Voicemails he didn't have the strength to open yet. Rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and reflective. Outside the precinct, cameras waited. Red lights blinked like watchful eyes. Mr. Reed, a reporter called out. Can you respond to the allegations? Marcus paused. His ribs throbbed with each breath, but he straightened anyway. He felt the pull of every instinct telling him to stay silent, to retreat, to let the process work. He also felt the familiar pressure of knowing silence could be rewritten for him. I haven't been charged with anything, he said calmly. And I won't comment until I've spoken fully with my attorney. Someone shouted. Did you resist arrest? Marcus didn't answer. He walked past the microphones, past the flashing lights, into a car waiting at the curb. As the door shut, the noise dulled, but it didn't disappear. It followed him, seeped into the air, into the city, into every screen. By the time he reached home, the story had multiplied. On television, panels argued in neat rectangles. A former officer spoke about split-second decisions. A commentator frowned sympathetically and said, "We don't know what happened before the camera started rolling." Another leaned forward and said, "This is about respect for law enforcement." Marcus muted the sound. The images kept moving anyway. He sat on the edge of his bed, jacket still on, shoes still damp. He unbuttoned his shirt slowly, wincing as fabric brushed against bruised skin. Purple and yellow bloomed across his ribs, his shoulder, his lower back. He stared at them, cataloging pain like evidence. His phone vibrated again. This time he answered. "Marcus," the voice said, tight with worry. "Where are you?" "Home," Marcus replied. "I'm okay." There was a pause. "That's not what it looks like." I know, Marcus said softly. She exhaled. They're saying you were aggressive. I wasn't. I know, she repeated, and the weight of those words pressed heavier than doubt. But people are already choosing sides. Marcus closed his eyes. When aren't they? After the call ended, memories rose uninvited. Not of the beating itself, but of years layered beneath it. Courtrooms where he'd stood beside men twice his size and half his age, accused of crimes that fit too neatly into expectations. Judges who avoided his eyes. Prosecutors who spoke slowly, carefully, as if clarity required condescension. He remembered law school nights spent arguing fairness with classmates who insisted the system was neutral, blind. He remembered his father's voice, patient and worn. The law is a tool, he'd said. Depends who's holding it. The next morning, Marcus woke to headlines sharper than pain. Courthouse clash. Man arrested after confrontation with police. Police union defends officer following use of force. Social media pulsed beneath the articles. Comments scrolled endlessly. He should have complied. Why was he there anyway? Funny how there's always a camera when they want sympathy. Marcus stopped reading when his chest tightened too much to ignore. Later that day, he met with his attorney, Linda Harper, in a quiet office away from the noise. She listened without interrupting as Marcus recounted every detail, her pen moving steadily across her notebook. They're building a familiar story, she said when he finished. And they're doing it fast. What do we do? Marcus asked. For now, we document, Linda said. Medical records, witness statements, video. And we wait. Marcus frowned. Wait for what? For the truth to catch up, she said. Or for the lie to collapse under its own weight. Waiting felt like suffocating. That evening, a news segment played on loop in the background while Marcus sat on his couch, ice pressed against his ribs. A familiar face appeared on screen, a city official he'd crossed paths with years ago. We have to trust our officers, the man said. They put their lives on the line every day. The anchor nodded solemnly. The officer involved has been placed on paid administrative leave. Administrative leave. Words that softened consequences until they barely resembled them. Marcus turned off the television. In the days that followed, the noise grew louder. Strangers recognized him in grocery stores, their looks ranging from pity to suspicion. Old classmates reached out with cautious messages. Others stayed silent. One afternoon, Marcus stood at his window, watching traffic crawl below. His phone rang again. Familiar number. Marcus, the voice said. It's Judge Ellis. Marcus straightened. Yes, sir. I saw the footage, Ellis said. And I saw the reporting. Marcus waited. There's a reason I'm calling you directly, Ellis continued. Timing matters. And so does restraint. Marcus understood what wasn't being said. He stared out at the city, at buildings that housed decisions shaping thousands of lives. I can handle it, Marcus said. I know you can, Ellis replied. But handling it doesn't mean carrying it alone. After the call ended, Marcus sat in silence. The bruises still ached. The headlines still spun. Somewhere, an officer slept easily, shielded by language and procedure. Marcus breathed slowly, grounding himself in the present. He thought of the oath he would soon take, the one few people knew about yet. He thought of the weight of it, pressing against the rawness of now. Outside, sirens wailed and faded. Inside, Marcus made a quiet decision. He would not let himself be flattened into a headline or reduced to background noise. If the system insisted on speaking for him, he would answer, clearly, deliberately, and in time. Not with anger, with truth. Internal affairs occupied a floor that felt intentionally forgettable. Gray walls, muted carpet, framed mission statements that spoke about integrity in fonts too thin to feel sincere. Marcus Reed sat in a molded plastic chair outside interview room B. Hands folded in his lap, suit jacket carefully arranged to hide the stiffness in his shoulder. He had dressed deliberately this morning. Neutral colors. Conservative cut. Nothing that could be read as defiant. Linda Harper sat beside him, scrolling through her tablet. "Remember," she said quietly. "Answer what's asked. Nothing more." Marcus nodded. He had learned long ago how words could be stretched, trimmed, turned against the person who spoke them. Inside institutions, language was never neutral. The door opened. The same older officer from the precinct stood there, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Reed," she said. "Ms. Harper. We're ready." The interview room was small and windowless. A recorder sat in the center of the table, its red light already on. Two investigators waited inside, one in plain clothes, the other still in uniform. Neither smiled. "State your name for the record," the plainclothes investigator said. "Marcus Reed," Marcus replied. They asked him to recount the incident again. Marcus did, slowly, carefully, describing the order, the movement, the shove, the baton. He spoke without embellishment, without anger. Linda watched the investigators' faces, alert for tells. "Did you raise your voice?" the uniformed investigator asked. "I don't believe so," Marcus said. "I spoke clearly." "Did you make any sudden movements?" "I reached for my wallet after being asked for ID," Marcus replied. "I explained what I was doing." The plainclothes investigator nodded, jotting notes. "The officer reports you clenched your fists." Marcus paused. "My hands were open." "Witnesses can be mistaken," the investigator said. "So can officers," Marcus replied calmly. The uniformed investigator's jaw tightened. "Are you accusing an officer of lying?" "I'm stating what happened," Marcus said. "Those aren't the same thing." They moved on to witnesses. Names Marcus recognized. People who had stood close, who had shouted. Linda slid a list of statements across the table. Some were strong, others hedged. "This witness initially said the baton was used without provocation," the plainclothes investigator said. "Later, they clarified they weren't sure." "Clarified," Marcus repeated softly. "They were nervous," the investigator continued. "Didn't want to get involved." Marcus leaned back slightly. "That nervousness," he said, choosing each word, "is part of the context." The room went quiet. After 2 hours, the interview ended. The investigators thanked them for their time with practiced politeness. No conclusions. No timelines. Outside, Linda exhaled sharply. "That went as expected." Marcus studied her face. "Which part?" "The part where they sound reasonable while circling the same assumptions," she said. "They'll take their time. They always do." In the hallway, a woman Marcus didn't recognize approached them. She wore business attire and an expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Reed," she said. "I'm Karen Walters. City Legal." Linda's posture stiffened. "We weren't informed." "I just wanted to introduce myself," Karen said smoothly. "And to say we're monitoring the situation closely." Marcus met her gaze. "What does that mean?" "It means," Karen said, lowering her voice, "that there are many interests at play. It would benefit everyone if this remained measured." Measured. Another soft word. "Truth doesn't need measuring," Marcus replied. Karen smiled thinly. "In practice, it often does." She walked away before Linda could respond. Over the next week, the pattern repeated. Requests for documents. Delays in responses. Witnesses who stopped answering calls. One man who had shouted loudly on the steps suddenly claimed he couldn't remember details. A woman who had filmed the incident declined to share her footage publicly after her employer expressed concern. Marcus watched it unfold with a familiarity that hurt more than surprise. Doors didn't slam. They closed gently, one by one. At night, sleep came in fragments. He woke sweating, the echo of a baton crack ringing in his ears. Some mornings, he sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor, grounding himself before standing. One afternoon, he met with a community organizer at a small cafe. The woman spoke in hushed tones. "People are scared," she said. "They support you. But they're scared. I don't blame them, Marcus replied. They're watching how this goes, she continued. What happens to you? Marcus wrapped his hands around his coffee, feeling the heat. That's part of the problem. Yes, she said softly. And part of the opportunity. Later that day, Marcus received an email marked confidential. It was brief, formal, and heavy with implication. A reminder of upcoming obligations. A suggestion that public statements might complicate matters. He closed his laptop slowly. That evening, he stood alone in his living room, city lights flickering beyond the window. His phone buzzed with another message. This one from a colleague. They're saying you should lay low. Marcus typed back a single sentence. Laying low doesn't make injustice disappear. As days turned into weeks, the bruises faded, but the weight remained. He attended meetings where his name was spoken cautiously, where conversations paused when he entered rooms. Some colleagues offered quiet support. Others offered distance. One night, Linda called him after reviewing new documents. They're narrowing the scope, she said. Focusing on procedure instead of outcome. So the question becomes whether the baton was justified, Marcus said. Not whether it was necessary. Exactly, Linda replied. Marcus leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Closed doors everywhere. Doors can open, Linda said. But it takes pressure. After the call ended, Marcus sat in the dark, listening to the hum of the city. He thought about the oath again, the responsibility waiting just beyond this moment. He thought about how systems protected themselves. Not with walls but with patience. Somewhere behind those closed doors, decisions were being shaped. Language was being refined. Accountability was being negotiated. Marcus stood and walked to the window. His reflection stared back at him. Tired, resolute, unbroken. They think time is on their side, he murmured to the empty room. Outside, a siren wailed and faded. Marcus knew better. Time didn't belong to power alone. It belonged to those willing to endure it, and answer when the doors finally opened. Internal affairs occupied a floor that felt intentionally forgettable. Gray walls, muted carpet, framed mission statements that spoke about integrity in fonts too thin to feel sincere. Marcus Reed sat in a molded plastic chair outside interview room B. Hands folded in his lap, suit jacket carefully arranged to hide the stiffness in his shoulder. He had dressed deliberately this morning. Neutral colors. Conservative cut. Nothing that could be read as defiant. Linda Harper sat beside him, scrolling through her tablet. Remember, she said quietly. Answer what's asked. Nothing more. Marcus nodded. He had learned long ago how words could be stretched, trimmed, turned against the person who spoke them. Inside institutions, language was never neutral. The door opened. The same older officer from the precinct stood there, clipboard in hand. Mr. Reed, she said. Ms. Harper. We're ready. The interview room was small and windowless. A recorder sat in the center of the table, its red light already on. Two investigators waited inside, one in plain clothes, the other still in uniform. Neither smiled. State your name for the record, the plainclothes investigator said. Marcus Reed, Marcus replied. They asked him to recount the incident again. Marcus did, slowly, carefully, describing the order, the movement, the shove, the baton. He spoke without embellishment, without anger. Linda watched the investigators' faces, alert for tells. Did you raise your voice? The uniformed investigator asked. I don't believe so, Marcus said. I spoke clearly. Did you make any sudden movements? I reached for my wallet after being asked for ID, Marcus replied. I explained what I was doing. The plainclothes investigator nodded, jotting notes. The officer reports you clenched your fists. Marcus paused. My hands were open. Witnesses can be mistaken, the investigator said. So can officers, Marcus replied calmly. The uniformed investigator's jaw tightened. Are you accusing an officer of lying? I'm stating what happened, Marcus said. Those aren't the same thing. They moved on to witnesses. Names Marcus recognized. People who had stood close, who had shouted. Linda slid a list of statements across the table. Some were strong, others hedged. This witness initially said the baton was used without provocation, the plainclothes investigator said. Later, they clarified they weren't sure. Clarified, Marcus repeated softly. They were nervous, the investigator continued. Didn't want to get involved. Marcus leaned back slightly. That nervousness, he said, choosing each word, is part of the context. The room went quiet. After 2 hours, the interview ended. The investigators thanked them for their time with practiced politeness. No conclusions. No timelines. Outside, Linda exhaled sharply. That went as expected. Marcus studied her face. Which part? The part where they sound reasonable while circling the same assumptions, she said. They'll take their time. They always do. In the hallway, a woman Marcus didn't recognize approached them. She wore business attire and an expression carefully neutral. Mr. Reed, she said. I'm Karen Walters. City Legal. Linda's posture stiffened. We weren't informed. I just wanted to introduce myself, Karen said smoothly. And to say we're monitoring the situation closely. Marcus met her gaze. What does that mean? It means, Karen said, lowering her voice, that there are many interests at play. It would benefit everyone if this remained measured. Measured. Another soft word. Truth doesn't need measuring, Marcus replied. Karen smiled thinly. In practice, it often does. She walked away before Linda could respond. Over the next week, the pattern repeated. Requests for documents. Delays in responses. Witnesses who stopped answering calls. One man who had shouted loudly on the steps suddenly claimed he couldn't remember details. A woman who had filmed the incident declined to share her footage publicly after her employer expressed concern. Marcus watched it unfold with a familiarity that hurt more than surprise. Doors didn't slam. They closed gently, one by one. At night, sleep came in fragments. He woke sweating, the echo of a baton crack ringing in his ears. Some mornings, he sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor, grounding himself before standing. One afternoon, he met with a community organizer at a small cafe. The woman spoke in hushed tones. People are scared, she said. They support you. But they're scared. I don't blame them, Marcus replied. They're watching how this goes, she continued. What happens to you? Marcus wrapped his hands around his coffee, feeling the heat. That's part of the problem. Yes, she said softly. And part of the opportunity. Later that day, Marcus received an email marked confidential. It was brief, formal, and heavy with implication. A reminder of upcoming obligations. A suggestion that public statements might complicate matters. He closed his laptop slowly. That evening, he stood alone in his living room, city lights flickering beyond the window. His phone buzzed with another message. This one from a colleague. They're saying you should lay low. Marcus typed back a single sentence. Laying low doesn't make injustice disappear. As days turned into weeks, the bruises faded, but the weight remained. He attended meetings where his name was spoken cautiously, where conversations paused when he entered rooms. Some colleagues offered quiet support. Others offered distance. One night, Linda called him after reviewing new documents. They're narrowing the scope, she said. Focusing on procedure instead of outcome. So the question becomes whether the baton was justified, Marcus said. Not whether it was necessary. Exactly, Linda replied. Marcus leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Closed doors everywhere. Doors can open, Linda said. But it takes pressure. After the call ended, Marcus sat in the dark, listening to the hum of the city. He thought about the oath again, the responsibility waiting just beyond this moment. He thought about how systems protected themselves. Not with walls but with patience. Somewhere behind those closed doors, decisions were being shaped. Language was being refined. Accountability was being negotiated. Marcus stood and walked to the window. His reflection stared back at him. Tired, resolute, unbroken. "They think time is on their side," he murmured to the empty room. Outside, a siren wailed and faded. Marcus knew better. Time didn't belong to power alone. It belonged to those willing to endure it, and answer when the doors finally opened. The courtroom was empty when Marcus Reed entered, lights dimmed, benches bare, the air heavy with stillness. He paused just inside the doorway, letting his eyes adjust. This room usually hummed with argument, with shifting bodies and restless breath, but tonight it felt suspended in time. His ribs still ached beneath his shirt, a dull reminder carried with him like a second shadow. He walked slowly toward the front, shoes echoing softly, each step deliberate, as if the room itself were watching and waiting. Only a few people were present. No press, no spectators. Just a clerk, 2 senior judges, and Linda standing quietly near the wall. The decision to keep the ceremony private had been framed as practical, respectful of circumstances. Marcus understood the other reason. This oath, taken now, would complicate every narrative forming outside these walls. He straightened his shoulders, feeling the weight of expectation settle there. Heavier than pain, heavier than fear, steady and unavoidable. "Are you ready?" Judge Ellis asked gently. Marcus nodded. "Yes." He stepped forward, raising his right hand. As the words began, familiar and formal, his mind drifted. He thought of the courthouse steps slick with rain, the baton striking flesh, the whispered insult meant to shrink him. He thought of reports written without him, doors closed politely in his face. Each memory pressed against the language of the oath, testing it, stretching it. To administer justice, to uphold the Constitution, to do so faithfully and impartially. His voice did not shake. When the oath ended, silence filled the room again. Judge Ellis extended a hand. "Congratulations, Judge Reed." The title landed differently than Marcus expected. Not triumphant, not redemptive. Heavy, real. "Thank you," Marcus said, gripping the offered hand. He felt the bruise on his shoulder protest, then fade beneath resolve. Linda's eyes met his across the room. Pride flickered there, mixed with concern. She knew what this meant. The protection it offered. The scrutiny it invited. There would be no clean separation between what had happened to him and what he now represented. After the ceremony, Marcus remained behind while the others quietly departed. He stood alone at the bench, running his fingers lightly along the polished wood. How many lives had turned on decisions made here? How many had left believing in the law, or broken by it? He closed his eyes briefly, grounding himself in the present. His phone vibrated. A message from a colleague. "It's official." Words spreading. Marcus exhaled slowly. "Of course it is." By morning the story shifted. Headlines updated, tone recalibrated. Man arrested outside courthouse identified as newly appointed district judge. Commentators stumbled over apologies, qualifiers. Pundits spoke of unfortunate misunderstandings. The same footage replayed, but now framed differently, as if context alone altered the violence. At the precinct, the mood changed too. Conversations cut short. Eyes widened when Marcus's name surfaced in briefings. The officer involved read the update on a tablet, color draining from his face as recognition dawned. The narrative he had relied on cracked, just enough to let fear seep through. Marcus watched it all from a careful distance. He declined interviews, issued a single written statement through Linda, measured and restrained. "This matter will be addressed through appropriate legal channels. I have full confidence in due process." The words were chosen with precision, each one a boundary. Privately, the cost pressed in. His sleep fractured further. The sense of being watched sharpened. Friends worried aloud about safety, about retaliation. Marcus listened, acknowledged, but did not retreat. He had spent his life navigating systems that demanded resilience without offering comfort. This was no different, only louder. One evening, Marcus returned to the courthouse alone. The building loomed familiar, imposing. He walked the same steps where he had fallen, now dry and empty. He stood there for a long moment, letting memory wash through him without resistance. "I remember," he whispered, not to the stone but to himself. He understood now that the oath was not armor. It would not erase what happened or shield him from future harm. It was a responsibility, a lens through which every action would be judged. Power did not undo trauma. It only clarified what one chose to do with it. As Marcus turned back toward the doors, his phone vibrated again. Another message. Another request. The work was already beginning. He squared his shoulders and walked inside. Justice, he knew, was not a moment. It was a practice. The recognition did not arrive all at once. It crept in through murmurs and tightened voices, through glances held a second too long. Marcus Reed felt it before he fully saw it. The subtle shift in air that followed him into rooms now, the way conversations recalibrated when his name appeared on agendas. At the precinct, the briefing room buzzed with restrained tension. A projector hummed, casting the same courthouse footage onto the wall yet again. This time the room was silent. "Pause it there," the captain said. The image froze on a familiar frame. Marcus on the ground, rain streaking across his face, an officer's baton raised mid-motion. The captain cleared his throat. "The individual in this video has been formally identified," he said. Marcus Reed, recently sworn in as district judge. A ripple moved through the room. Chairs creaked. Someone muttered a curse under their breath. The officer involved stared at the screen. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. His certainty, built on uniform, on habit, on assumption, fractured. He replayed the moment in his head, searching for a version where this detail didn't exist. There was none. "Questions?" the captain asked. No one spoke. Across the city the shift echoed. Newsrooms reframed scripts. Producers called emergency meetings. Headlines softened, then sharpened again in different places. Judge beaten by police outside his own court. The footage spread wider, shared with commentary stripped of its earlier doubt. Marcus watched from his office, the television muted. He had chosen this space carefully. Neutral walls. Books lined in careful order. A place that felt earned, not inherited. Linda stood by the window, phone pressed to her ear, fielding calls. "They want statements," she said after hanging up. "From you. From the court. From everyone." Marcus nodded. "They'll wait." "You're sure?" "Yes." The knock came mid-afternoon. A court administrator stepped in, posture stiff. "Judge Reed," she said. "Internal Affairs has requested a follow-up interview." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Already? They say there are new considerations." Course there were. The second interview felt different. Less confident. More careful. Questions softened at the edges, wrapped in professional courtesy. "Judge Reed," the plainclothes investigator said, "we want to assure you this process is impartial." Marcus met his gaze. "It was impartial before I had a title," he replied calmly. The investigator shifted. "We're reviewing additional footage." "Good," Marcus said. Outside those walls, consequences began to take shape. The officer was suspended without pay. The union released a statement filled with conditional language and concern. Community leaders demanded transparency. Protests formed on the same steps where Marcus had bled. One evening, Marcus attended a closed meeting with senior officials. The room was heavy with discomfort. "We regret what happened," a council member said. "This does not reflect our values." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Values aren't reflected in statements," he said. "They're reflected in systems." Silence followed. Another official cleared his throat. "What would you like to see happen?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He thought of the officer's face when recognition hit, of fear replacing certainty, of how quickly power recalibrated when confronted with its own reflection. "I want the process to work," Marcus said finally. "Without shortcuts. Without special treatment. For you or for him?" someone asked. "For anyone," Marcus replied. The officer was charged weeks later. The announcement came quietly, buried beneath other news, but it mattered. Charges meant acknowledgement. They meant the story could no longer be smoothed into a misunderstanding. Marcus recused himself immediately, filing the paperwork with practiced precision. The choice drew criticism from both sides. Some accused him of protecting the system. Others of wielding influence even in absence. He accepted neither narrative. At night, the recognition followed him home. Strangers approached him now with reverence or resentment. Some thanked him for standing. Others watched with narrowed eyes, as if waiting for him to falter. One evening, Marcus returned to the courthouse steps again. Protest signs leaned against the railings. Candles burned low, wax pooling at their bases. Someone had chalked words into the stone. "Justice sees you." Marcus stood there alone, letting the night air cool his skin. He felt the familiar ache in his ribs, the deeper ache in his chest. Recognition had changed everything and nothing at once. It had exposed the lie, but not erased the harm. It had shifted the narrative, but not the memory. As he turned to leave, his phone buzzed. A message from Linda. "The case is moving forward." Marcus looked back at the steps one last time. This wasn't vindication. It was accountability beginning to take shape. Uneven, imperfect, and overdue. And for the first time since the rain-soaked morning, Marcus allowed himself to believe that the truth, once recognized, could no longer be easily ignored. Accountability did not arrive with applause. It arrived with paperwork, sealed envelopes, and long pauses before people answered their phones. Marcus Reed learned quickly that consequence was quieter than outrage, heavier than celebration. It moved through offices and inboxes, through meetings closed to the public, through language designed to sound procedural rather than moral. The formal charges were announced on a Thursday afternoon. Marcus heard about them the same way everyone else did, through a notification vibrating against his desk. He read the headline once, then again, letting the words settle without reaction. Officer charged following courthouse assault. Independent prosecutor appointed. Linda called moments later. "It's official," she said. "They're moving forward." Marcus leaned back in his chair, eyes closed. Relief tried to surface, but it stalled, tangled in caution. "What are they charging him with?" "Assault under color of law," Linda replied. "Excessive force. Falsification of reports." Marcus opened his eyes. The list felt both validating and insufficient. "And the department?" "Under investigation," Linda said. "Pattern review. Use of force protocols. Training records." Marcus exhaled slowly. "Good." That afternoon, he filed his recusal notice in person. The clerk accepted it without comment, eyes avoiding his. Marcus understood the discomfort. His presence complicated clean lines. Ethics demanded distance, even when distance felt like surrender. As he left the clerk's office, a colleague caught up to him in the hallway. "You didn't have to recuse," the man said quietly. "No one would have questioned it." Marcus stopped walking. "Everyone would have questioned it," he replied. "Including me." The man nodded, chastened. "Fair enough." Outside, the protests shifted in tone. Signs that once demanded recognition now demanded reform. Speakers stood on makeshift platforms, voices cracking with exhaustion and resolve. Marcus attended one gathering quietly, standing at the edge of the crowd, hood pulled low. A woman recognized him anyway. She stepped forward, eyes bright. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" Marcus asked. "For not letting them bury it," she replied. Marcus hesitated. "It's not buried," he said. But it's not finished either. At the precinct, the officer sat alone in a small room, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the table. His attorney spoke in measured tones, outlining next steps, possible defenses. The officer barely listened. His world had narrowed to a series of moments he could not undo. "I didn't know," he said suddenly. His attorney looked up. "Didn't know what?" "That he was." The officer trailed off, jaw tightening. "It wouldn't have happened if I'd known." The attorney studied him carefully. "That's not the defense you think it is." The officer looked up, confusion giving way to fear. For the first time, the shield he had trusted felt thin. Marcus did not attend the hearing. He watched coverage later, muted, observing without indulging. He saw the officer's face, older somehow, stripped of certainty. He felt no satisfaction, only a sober recognition of how quickly power evaporated when it stopped being protected. Privately, the toll accumulated. Marcus flinched at sudden sounds. His patience thinned. Some nights, he woke with his heart racing, the phantom echo of impact still sharp. Linda urged him to talk to someone. "You're allowed to be affected," she said gently. "I know," Marcus replied. "I just don't know when it ends." "Maybe it doesn't," she said. "Maybe you learn to carry it differently." As weeks passed, the investigation widened. Emails surfaced. Training logs contradicted testimony. Patterns emerged. Complaints dismissed, reports rewritten, warnings ignored. The story grew larger than one officer, larger than Marcus. That brought its own backlash. Anonymous messages flooded Marcus's inbox. Accusations of betrayal. Threats thinly veiled as advice. He forwarded them to security, documenting each one without comment. Fear became another item to manage, another weight to balance. One evening, Judge Ellis called him again. "You did the right thing," Ellis said. "But right doesn't always feel good." Marcus smiled faintly. "No one ever promised it would." Ellis paused. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Marcus considered the question. The visibility, the expectations, the quiet pressure to become a symbol rather than a person. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I'm not stepping away." "That's all anyone can ask," Ellis said. The trial date was set. Another step. Another line crossed. Marcus returned to the courthouse steps one last time before the proceedings began. Early morning. No crowds. Just stone and sky. He stood there, breathing in the cool air, grounding himself in the present. He placed a hand against the railing where he had been shoved weeks before. The metal was cold, indifferent. He didn't expect comfort from it. Accountability, he realized, was not about balance. It did not restore what was taken or erase what was done. Named harm. It disrupted silence. It forced systems to look at themselves without flinching. Marcus stepped back, straightened his jacket, and turned toward the doors. Inside, the work continued. Justice was still imperfect, still slow, still fragile. But it was no longer pretending nothing had happened. And that, Marcus knew, was a beginning. The quiet after accountability felt heavier than the chaos before it. Marcus Reed learned that quickly. When the hearings ended for the day and the cameras packed up, what remained was not relief but a hollow stillness that pressed in at odd moments, while brushing his teeth, while waiting at red lights, while standing alone in elevators that smelled faintly of disinfectant and metal. He had expected anger to linger. He had not expected the fatigue. Some mornings, he woke already tired, as if sleep had merely paused the weight instead of easing it. His ribs had healed enough to stop aching constantly, but certain movements still pulled at old pain, sharp and instructive. Trauma, he realized, did not announce itself loudly. It whispered, intruded, waited. At work, people watched him differently now. Not suspicious, reverent, careful. Conversations softened when he entered rooms. Clerks double-checked tone. Attorneys measured their words with extra precision. It was meant as respect. Felt like distance. "You don't have to carry all of this alone," Linda said one afternoon as they walked down a quiet hallway. Marcus stopped. I know. Knowing and doing are different, she replied. He smiled faintly. You always say that. And you always agree without changing anything. Marcus didn't argue. He had always believed endurance was a virtue. Lately, he wondered if it was also a habit learned too early. The community's expectations grew louder. Invitations arrived daily. Panels, speeches, town halls. People wanted him visible, wanted reassurance that justice could still speak in their voice. He said yes to some, no to others. Each decision felt like a small betrayal of someone's hope. At a town hall in a packed auditorium, a young man stood and asked, "How do we trust the system when it did that to you?" The room went silent. Marcus felt every eye settle on him. "I don't ask for blind trust," he said after a moment. "I ask for pressure, for vigilance. Systems change when people refuse to stop watching them." The applause was loud. It did not follow him home. That night, Marcus sat alone in his living room, lights off, city glowing beyond the windows. His phone lay face down on the table. He had learned that rest required intentional silence. Even then, his thoughts intruded. He saw the officer's face again, not as it had appeared on the steps, but as it looked in the courtroom. Mueller. Uncertain. Human in a way that complicated simple narratives. Marcus did not feel pity. He felt a quiet, unsettled recognition. Harm did not require monsters. It required permission. Sleep came late and fractured. He woke before dawn, heart racing, breath shallow. For a moment, the room felt unfamiliar, as if he were still inside a holding cell. He sat up, feet on the floor, grounding himself. "It's over," he whispered. The words felt half true. The next day, he met with a therapist Linda had recommended. The office was warm, unassuming. The therapist listened without interruption as Marcus spoke. Not just about the beating, but about the years that led up to it. The small humiliations. The calculations. The constant awareness of how he was read. "Trauma isn't only what happened," the therapist said gently. "It's what it confirmed." Marcus swallowed. He had not thought of it that way. The realization landed quietly, then stayed. Outside, the trial moved forward. Evidence mounted. The process unfolded with methodical patience. Some nights Marcus watched coverage. Other nights, he couldn't bring himself to turn on the television. A colleague pulled him aside one evening. "People are projecting a lot onto you," she said. "Be careful not to become a symbol at the expense of yourself." Marcus nodded. "I'm trying." She studied him. Trying isn't resting. He took that with him. The backlash didn't disappear. It evolved. Letters arrived. Some handwritten, some anonymous. Gratitude tangled with hostility. One envelope contained nothing but a printed photo of the courthouse steps. No message. Marcus filed it away with the others. Security protocols tightened. Routes varied. Doors locked more carefully. The measures were necessary. They also reinforced a truth Marcus had hoped to avoid. Visibility carried risk. One evening, he visited his mother. She moved slowly now, hands steady but cautious. She touched his face, tracing the fading bruise near his jaw. "You look thinner," she said. "I'm fine," Marcus replied automatically. She gave him a look that cut through defenses built over decades. "You don't have to be fine for me." He sat with her at the kitchen table, the familiar smell of tea grounding him. For a while they spoke of ordinary things. Weather, neighbors. Silence settled comfortably between them. "I worry," she said eventually. "I know. I'm proud," she added. "But pride doesn't erase worry." Marcus reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "I'm still here." He squeezed back. "That matters." As the weeks passed, Marcus began to find moments of steadiness again. Short walks without headphones, meals cooked slowly, even laughter unexpected and brief. Healing, he learned, did not arrive as a clean arc. Came in fragments. The night before a pivotal hearing, Marcus stood once more at his window, city lights stretching endlessly. He felt the familiar ache, not just in his body but in his chest. The cost of standing had been real. The cost of silence would have been greater. He breathed deeply, feeling the air fill his lungs without resistance. Tomorrow would bring more scrutiny, more weight, more expectation. But tonight, Marcus allowed himself to rest, not because the work was done, but because he was still human beneath the robe, beneath the narrative, beneath the noise. Justice demanded endurance. Healing demanded mercy. And learning the difference, he realized, was part of the work too. The verdict arrived on a gray morning, quiet and unceremonious. Marcus Reed read it alone in his office, the courthouse humming faintly beyond the door. The language was precise, restrained, almost modest for the weight it carried. Guilty on the primary charge. Accountability affirmed. Consequences named. Marcus set the document down and closed his eyes. There was no rush of triumph, no sense of completion, just a slow, steady release, like a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding since the rain-soaked morning on the steps. Justice had spoken, but it did not shout. It rarely did. Outside, reporters gathered again, voices rising and falling in practiced rhythm. Statements would be made. Context would be debated. Some would call the outcome overdue. Others would call it unfair. The cycle would continue, reshaping itself around the next headline. Marcus chose not to attend the press conference. Instead, he walked the long corridor toward courtroom 3, empty at this hour. His footsteps echoed softly, the sound grounding him in the present. He entered the room and stood behind the bench, resting his hands on the polished wood. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel the enormity of where he stood, not just physically but in time. He thought of the people who would never see accountability rendered so clearly. The cases buried beneath paperwork and indifference. The names forgotten. Justice, when it arrived, did not distribute itself evenly. A clerk appeared at the doorway. "Judge Reed." Marcus turned. "Yes. There's a community gathering outside," she said. "They asked if you'd come." Marcus considered it. The exhaustion, the expectation, the careful choreography of gratitude and restraint. "In a moment," he said. He left the courtroom and made his way down the steps. Those steps, slowly, deliberately. The stone was dry today, warm beneath the sun. People waited below, signs lowered, faces open and wary. When they saw him, a hush fell. Marcus stopped a few steps above them, neither elevated nor immersed. He did not speak immediately. He looked at the faces, young and old, hopeful and tired. He saw the reflection of himself in them, years ago and now. "This outcome matters," he said finally. "But it isn't the end." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. "Accountability is not a finish line," Marcus continued. "It's a practice, one that requires attention, pressure, and care. From all of us." Someone called out, "Thank you for standing." Marcus nodded once. "Thank you for watching." He stepped back, letting the moment pass without prolonging it. Applause rose, then softened as he turned away. He felt lighter and heavier all at once. That evening, Marcus returned home to a quiet apartment. He loosened his tie, set it aside, and poured himself a glass of water. The city outside moved as it always had, unaware, relentless. He stood at the window and watched headlights stream below, each one a separate story, intersecting briefly before moving on. His phone buzzed with a message from Linda. "Proud of you," Marcus typed back. "We did our jobs." He sat on the couch and let the stillness settle. For the first time in weeks, his chest did not feel tight. The ache was there, but it no longer dominated every thought. Healing had begun quietly, without ceremony. Later he walked outside and headed toward the courthouse one last time. Night had fallen, and the building glowed softly, its outline familiar against the dark sky. Marcus stood at the bottom of the steps and looked up. He remembered the fear. The humiliation. The certainty that he had been reduced to a body in the wrong place at the wrong time. He remembered the whisper meant to diminish him. He also remembered what followed. The insistence on truth. The refusal to let the story be rewritten without resistance. The slow turning of a system that preferred stillness. Marcus placed a hand on the railing and closed his eyes. "I remember," he said quietly. Then he let it go. The steps would always be there. The memory would too. But they no longer defined him. They were part of a larger story now. One that included accountability, cost, and the difficult grace of endurance. As Marcus turned away, he felt something settle inside him. Not closure. Not victory. Something steadier. Purpose. Tomorrow he would return to the bench. He would listen. He would weigh arguments and make decisions that mattered to people he might never meet again. The work would be imperfect. So would he. But the law, held carefully, could still be a tool for repair. Marcus walked into the night, leaving the courthouse behind him. The city breathed around him, indifferent and alive. Somewhere another story was beginning. Somewhere, another injustice waited to be named. For now, Marcus Reed allowed himself to be simply a man who had stood, been struck, endured and answered. Not with silence, but with truth. And that, he knew, would have to be enough.